You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this show. And of course, here we are. We're back on our usual Friday night at 11 o'clock time. Actually feels kind of good.
I know, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was, don't get me wrong. It was cool to do this in the afternoon on a Sunday, but I am glad that we're doing this on Friday night again. It's kind of a nice way to ease into the weekend. So next week, even though I'm going to be out of town, I should be back in town by the time of our next Friday show. The only thing is, we're probably going to get a pre-recorded show for Monday, but that's about the only change as that goes. So, yeah, it was really interesting watching this week's episode because, of course, we finally got the return of our fan favorite, Asajj Ventress, and there's a lot of interesting things about this that I'm sure we're going to talk about. But one of the things that I thought I would bring up before we really get into the whole thing, right, is the fact that this episode is called The Harbinger. And generally speaking, that means, you always hear the phrase the harbinger of doom or whatever. It's usually something that precedes something else. So something comes, and then that's a sign of something else to come. And so the idea here, or at least what's being insinuated, is that Asajj is actually the Harbinger, so it makes you wonder what's coming up. And of course, we could speculate about that as we actually get in the episode, but I just want to bring that up because that is the title, and I'm sure that means something. And if you guys have any theories about that too, definitely put those in the chat. Or if you're watching after the fact, go ahead and put that in the comment section. But overall, I thought this was another really good episode. I thought the pacing is actually really something that I appreciate about these episodes that we've seen so far. And again, season 3 is not disappointing at all. I mean, in my view anyway, they have had no misses. I think that you can maybe say, okay, they're bringing Asajj Ventress back. It was a little bit different than what I think people expected, especially when they saw the trailer. But, and I don't think by any stretch, by the way, that we've seen the last of her, but I like the balance of humor, the balance of action, the fact that Asajj is still very much a threat if you get on her bad side, but, she's not bad. And of course, at some point tonight, we're also going to have to talk about the fact that she died in Dark Disciple. So, how is she back? And, we can get into all that. So, overall, I thought that this was a really good episode. And by the way, before we get into this, before I turn it over to you to give your thoughts overall on this, I am aware that next week there are 2 episodes that are going to hit. I saw that. I was looking. I don't remember what it was. It wasn't like the official schedule or something, but I did notice. I don't know what I was reading. I was reading something, and they were giving the rest of some of the episodes, and I noticed there's going to be 2 episodes that are released next week. So we will be reviewing both of them. I will make sure that I watch them both somehow. All right, so as far as this week's overall thoughts before we really get into this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this was a very interesting, episode. I love seeing Asajj Ventress come back. We were out, and that was one of the things that we mentioned on our last episode. We were talking about things that we wanted to see going into this episode, and so we were talking about, I think this is the time where we're going to get Asajj, and of course, so shall she appear, and I think that it was really cool in typical Asajj fashion. She comes in creepy, but I love the fact that how they utilized her. I mean, she's not a Jedi, obviously. She's not a Sith. She's not even a Sith apprentice anymore. Um, she's more kind of, I can't even necessarily call her a bounty hunter. She's almost kind of a mercenary for hire in a way. Um, I was like a bridge between mercenary and bounty hunter. I think that's kind of where we could kind of look at Asajj as far as title, if we can, if we were to
Well,
classify her as something,
yeah,
you know.
I honestly think that her trajectory, at least for a while, not in totality, but it almost follows Darth Maul's trajectory in a way. I mean, he basically left the Sith Order, and he wasn't really good, wasn't really bad. I mean, I think that Asajj is definitely more of a good guy per se than Maul obviously was, but you can see
Well,
that
Maul was
there's
trying
some
to do the whole
similar.
criminal empire thing
Well,
because he was
yeah,
like,
but
Crimson
that's it,
Dawn and
right? Well, yeah, and that comes a little bit later, but absolutely, he did go along that path where she's not necessarily doing anything criminal. It's kind of like you said, she's just sort of out. Well, and she even says at the end of the episode that she's kind of on her own side and she's, just sort of doing her own thing.
hmm. Yeah, I think, and that's why I said I think she's just kind of almost like, okay, I think she's a darker. Would you say that she's a darker version of Ahsoka?
Yeah.
A slightly
Well,
darker version of
and
Ahsoka.
there was they basically hinted at that at the Clone Wars anyway, because if you remember, Asajj basically helped Ahsoka, and
Hmm.
it was like the two sides of the same coin type of thing, right? Whereas Ahsoka leaned a little bit more light, Asajj leaned a little bit more dark. But absolutely, I would say that they're 100% two sides of the same coin, and they are very similar on their trajectory, no doubt.
Yeah, and I think, excuse me, I think that that kind of adds in like a nice little spice to having her in because you kind of almost don't know, and that's kind of how the Bad Batch feels with her around. Like, okay, if she wanted to kill us, she definitely had ample opportunity to do so. But even Omega pointed that out, and then, but at the same time, it's like, okay, she seems like she wants to help the kid, and she feels kind of sorry for them in a way. So it's a very interesting um position for us as the viewers to see Asajj because we know her checkered past, so to speak.
Right.
So that makes things really fun for me in this episode. I loved watching even Josh kind of forget sometimes how skilled she is hand to hand. Like she
Yep.
didn't even use her lightsaber and she was just like kicking the crap out of the Bad Batch with ease. And that's what I loved. I love that it didn't seem like those guys could really hang with her. It's like it really showed her superiority as a fighter, as as a true combatant. Like, guys, you have no idea. Like, yeah, you are elite warriors, but you're soldiers. Like, I'm something more, and you see that in her, and I really loved that aspect of the humor was great that Asajj did, especially that one line she did with us with Omega. Uh, you know, she's like, "Stop smiling. It's unsettling."
Yeah, it's
you know,
unsettling.
like I love that. And it was like such an Asajj Ventures line. Um, very true to her character. I thought it was interesting to see her trying to use like Jedi strategies to try to teach Omega because she was like,
Hmm.
"Well, I'm not a Jedi, but I'm familiar with some of the stuff that they do." And the fact that she's trying to implore that with Omega, I thought that was interesting and cool.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things that was ironic was even Wrecker couldn't stand against her. And usually Wrecker, even if he's
Yeah,
having problems, he's at least in the game. I mean, in this, Wrecker ended
yeah,
up pretty much falling, and you're not really used to seeing that because the other clones, yeah, but Wrecker,
yeah,
he's
exactly.
he's basically a tank and he couldn't even stand against her. But it
Yeah,
was,
kind of remember that scene from Avengers Infinity Wars when Thanos kicked the crap out of Thor. Kicked the crap out of the Hulk, like in the first. like 10 minutes of the movie, you're just like, whoa, you're not used to seeing the Hulk not even
Wait,
really
was
being
that
in the
the one
game like
where Loki was like, "Now you know how it feels" or something like that?
no,
That was
that was
something that was
Ragnarok.
in Ragnarok, right? Yeah, that's
That was
right.
in
That was in
Ragnarok.
Ragnarok. That was
No,
still one of I mean, I'm just cracking up even thinking about it actually. But that was
yeah. No, that was no.
oh.
Infinity Wars is like when the Hulk. He's like, the Hulk showed up because actually it's funny because Loki said the line, "We have a Hulk," and that's when he popped up, and he was, giving Thanos the business at first, and Thanos' little henchman's like, "Wait, let him have his fun," and I'm just kind of like, "Huh?" And then Thanos just like obliterates the Hulk to the point where the Hulk is like terrified, doesn't want to come out anymore. He's like, "Nope, I'm out." It was just like, and that's kind of how I felt for Record, man. It was just like he had no choice. And he kept trying to say, like, oh, we were just warming up. Like, nah, dude.
Yeah, no you weren't. No you weren't. No, but I mean that was really one of the cool things about this episode, I thought, was the fact that they balanced a lot of. And again, they're really doing this with all the episodes, but this is a type of an episode where they might be tempted to, maybe play up Asajj a little bit with Omega, the Force, and do. I mean, there's just like several more cliche directions that they could go, but they didn't. They kept a really good balance between the humor because Asajj never really was super humorous before. I mean, she
No.
had like that sort of snaky type humor, I guess.
She had that dark, sinister humor.
Yeah, but I mean, it wasn't like anything like this, right? She had one line early on too that I'm trying to remember, um, that I thought was really hilarious when she first started training Omega, and she was,
Yeah.
talking to the guys or something. But I
Oh,
mean, even some of
her
this,
humor is like crosshairs, actually.
yeah, actually, that's true. Her humor is a lot like that. But I thought they balanced that. They balanced a lot of the action. They had a lot of the whole character development. And the pacing was just right. And I mean, all of
Hmm.
these things are so difficult to achieve, especially, again, this episode was something like 26 minutes or something close to that. And to get all that correct is really a challenging thing to do on a show like this, especially when you're bringing back a fan favorite character. The temptation, of course, is to rely on that and to, maybe play that up a little
Hmm.
bit. But they didn't do that this time. And I thought that was just really, I mean, I guess it was another example of just the really great writing that we're experiencing this season.
Yeah, I really think that was it was really well done. It was well paced. I could agree. You had enough of the storyline. You had enough of the the rising action. Like, okay, we gotta figure out. First of all, now they know what that really means. So they
Right.
got their answer.
Well, and that's
So then
something that I
now it's
appreciated, right? That was done like
mhm.
right in the beginning. Like, I mean,
Yeah,
they didn't take like half the episode to do it. It was like, you know, they're kind of messing around on the beach or whatever, and then Omega finds the ship, and then she immediately finds Omega, and then, talking about the M count, and then they all find out about that. I mean, it was very quickly paced. They didn't make us wait for all that stuff.
yeah. Even the childish, typical. Well, we're trying to. Why do you want to know? Oh, well, my friend,
That was
is
great.
trying to. I'm like, and this, I'm going to be a Jedi. I mean, like, okay,
Hmm.
way to go, kid. It's not like she wouldn't know anyway. Um, but yeah, so I thought that was cool. The fact that they got their answer, and so now it's like, okay, well, now we have to try to figure out if this kid really has the potential to, do this stuff. And it's always amazing to me how like they just like, all right, well, let's see what you can do. And I often wonder, like, how many kids really get these pass these tests out the gate? It's like day one, and you're like, okay, stand on a rock, lift. You got this apple on your head, or move this rock while you're balancing. You know what I mean? Like, how how often do kids really just get that out, on the first try or even the first day? Because it is, and that's what I loved about Omega. I love the sense of reality that she put into it when she's like, reach out with what? I don't even know what you're talking about. Like, exactly, like that's
Well,
exactly
and
how you would
again,
react to that. It's
see,
like, what
and
do you mean?
this is my point though. If this were Ray, she would have gotten it all immediately. And this is what I
Right.
think is really cool about the way they're handling it here with Omega, is they're not having her get it right away. In fact, not only doesn't she get it, she doesn't even understand what's being asked of her. And I think that that's really something that's a little bit different, because of Temptation, what we've been seeing from Star Wars lately is that she would just try it and show some crazy aptitude or something, you know. And it's true. It's kind of like, well, when you're looking at these tests, you do have to wonder, like, well, okay, how many people, I mean, is this really accurate? I mean, what if your M count's high, but you're just, you're just not getting it? I mean, even later on when it's like, okay, go out and reach out and communicate with fish or something. It's like, well, how am I supposed to do that?
Right.
You
That's
know,
why
it's
I love
like,
Omega. She was like, you can't even probably do this.
right. And then, of course, she does. I mean, that's what this photo,
Mhm.
to the right of us is actually depicting, is the moment. And that's another thing that I thought was cool, by the way, about this episode, is that you're actually seeing Asajj doing like more light side type stuff. Like, this is kind of one of those like light side type of thing. And it was very cool. I mean, besides the fact that obviously she has hair now, is that, she has her yellow lightsaber now. So we're seeing now more of a light side Asajj. And it was interesting. You pointed this out earlier in the show, where when she's teaching Omega all these things, she's doing it more from a Jedi perspective than anything else. This is definitely swinging more light
Yeah.
side. Like, this whole thing is more of a light side type of a thing. This is kind of like an Ezra, maybe Ray,
Yeah.
type of a thing.
Yeah.
And it was just fascinating to see Asajj now incorporating this type of a force power and seeing her demonstrate that. And again, it was almost like the Luke and Yoda thing, right? Where it's kind of like, what you want is impossible. And Yoda's just like, all right, I guess I got to show this kid. It's the same thing. Omega's like, well, you probably can't even do it. It's like, all right. And what's ironic about it, I think, did that scene come before the clones knew who she actually was and tried to warn Omega, or was that after?
It was after, because they already knew, and that's what I love too, when they kind of figured out who she was, because Ventress is kind of like ear hustling and listening to their conversation. And so
Yeah,
she
I know.
realized that they knew as well. So she's like, oh boy, like, okay, I already know I'm about to get a bunch of grief about this. And, that's why they were kind of like, all right, we got to let her go, but we're going to keep an eye on her. And so that's why, and that was so funny because Wrecker had the binoculars and like Asajj just turned to look dead at him.
Yeah.
And she's like, how does she know that we were even doing
How does she
this?
even know that we're even looking at her?
Which is like half a mile away, from her. So I thought that was hilarious. But yeah, it just watching Asajj do this. But to your point, Eric, she's using a light side ability, but she inadvertently woke up this other beast that she didn't intend. So you can see Asajj even herself isn't really, as she gets it, but it's not really her thing completely.
Well, that's the thing. It's like, why are they going? I don't know. Did you call this? I mean, it was funny in the sense too, because I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the things I wanted to point out about this episode was, as idyllic and everything as Pabu is, their ocean, man, contains some freaky. I mean, remember the last episode where that thing was trying to? I mean, there was like all these crazy things. It's like, you know what? The land part's cool. It's very, very, paradise-like or whatever. You might want to just stay out of the water, because there's a lot of things in that water that can really. I mean, that thing was like really freaky. Yeah.
Yeah, it seemed like a cross between like a giant crab and an octopus, like had a baby or something. And
Yeah, it's kind of like a
had a
conch.
shell.
Yeah, it's like a conch. It totally reminded me of a conch meets. Yeah.
or a kraken or something like that. You know what I mean? Um, but yeah, I thought that was really cool. Just and once again, you saw Ventress. She's like, okay, well, your friends aren't making it better shooting at the thing. Just kind of tell them to back off. And then she was able to use the Force almost much like Ezra, and was able to kind of communicate with it and show its energy and kind of get it to calm down, just like Kanan did on in
And I
Rebels
hate
with
to
those
and I hate to say it,
spiders.
but just like Rey did
Well,
with the snake in Rise of
yeah.
Skywalker, you
Hmm.
know, it's that same kind of thing, and it's funny to me because it's like that's suddenly a thing now. You know, it's kind of like everybody's communicating with like they're all Aquaman all of a sudden, and it's just it's one of those things where I'm like, okay, we never seen this, and now all of a sudden you're getting all these people suddenly communicate. I mean, I get that it's a force power that people want to show, but it just the problem with creating a new force power is that the fans like us who have consumed tons of content over the last 40 years, our minds are
Hmm.
instantly going to go to, well, where
Where
was
was
this?
this?
Yeah. Why didn't anybody use this? Like Luke could have communicated with the Rancor this way. Why didn't he do that? It's
Or the
like,
Wampa?
or the Wampa, which actually both situations that would have come in real handy. And
Hmm.
that's the problem is that, obviously the real answer is, well, that wasn't written at the time. When something's been around like that, you want to constantly come up with new stuff because you
Yeah.
want to keep it interesting to people. But the problem is you now have to deal with the in-universe problem with, well, where was this power over there? You're telling me that, these people know how to use it, but Luke didn't? I mean, maybe during the Wampa attack I can see that because he was still relatively new, but by Return of the Jedi, he would certainly know how to do it. So
Hmm.
that's the only issue I think with creating these newer force powers that are now being used to death. I could have even hung with it if they wanted to keep it like say to Rey or maybe actually Ezra was the first person that demonstrated this. If they just kept it to that would have made more sense to me. Now you could say, well, Ezra came before, so maybe that became somehow, I don't know, in the Jedi text somewhere or something. I don't know. But it just seems problematic sometimes when they try to do these things.
Yeah. I mean, it does become sometimes like, okay, like a matter of convenience. Like, okay, oh yeah, now it's so convenient that you can do this now. Whereas, in times past, this would have been helpful on a litany of other occasions with people who were more powerful than even these folks.
Mhm.
So why didn't they use it? Um, and so that, of course, we have to come up with different in-universe answers to explain that. But I also enjoyed the fact that, like, okay, Omega is kind of like, all right, she's asking these questions. She's like, okay, what does this even mean? How do you, do this? And Ventress is trying to kind of, and it's much no different than how we enjoyed watching Crosshair and Omega run around together. I would enjoy watching this. I would love watching Ventress and Omega run around together because
Or even better, Omega, Ventress, and Crosshair running around together. That would be
see, Crosshair,
hilarious.
Crosshair and Ventress, I could see those two being in a relationship together because they're very much alike. It's like a Mr. and Mrs. Smith type thing, and they would have to watch over Omega, who's like this kid that's nowhere near like them as far as personality wise. That would be hilarious. um,
Oh yeah.
but yeah, I mean, this is a really cool episode. Um, I wonder why Ventress lied to Omega and told her like, nah, I don't think so. But even though Hunter and was it Crosshair? Yeah, Hunter and Crosshair knew like, no, you're lying. You know, something's up. And then she kind of just alluded to it, like, well,
Well, I think a lot of that is because she did actually fail the test technically. I mean, unless they try to say, oh, well, the object is, sometimes how the object in a test is actually different from the obvious. It's more of an intellect test than anything else. But if they're going to keep it
test.
right, but if they're going to keep it at face value, okay, then I think that part of what it is you have to. It's almost like maybe there's another part of it that she did, even though she failed the test. It's like, no, there's something else telling that she had a higher M count or something like that. And I think maybe Ventress is trying to downplay it, either not to alarm them or to throw them out. I mean, it's going to be weird to see. We got a new chatter in, Walker Lane Brain. I love the name. It says, oh no, I'd rather see Ventress and Quinlan Voss on screen. It's funny that you bring that up. It's funny you bring that up because as Daryl was making the comment, I was thinking in my head, you know what? No, that would be cooler, because for those of us who have read Dark Disciple, you have to understand that in the book, obviously they started out at odds, but the way that the relationship progressed and the way that they handled it, it was just so good. And they ended up making this really surprisingly good couple, actually, that you really wanted to see more of that. And I mean, look, since that was brought up, we might as well venture into this a little bit too.
See what you did there?
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, wait, that's a pun, isn't it? I think that it's going to be somewhat interesting to see how they handle this, because canonically speaking, she technically was dead. Or at least it was strongly alluded that she was dead. Let's put it that way. Now, again, and I brought this up on last week's show, if, they can resurrect Maul, they can resurrect anybody. Because, I mean, Ventress, if I remember the book correctly, she died from, like, she took it's been a minute.
Blast from...
I think she took a blast from Dooku. I think it was Dooku. I think Dooku was going for Quinlan, and she absorbed it or something, sacrificed herself. I remember whatever it was really beautiful, because it's honestly one of the first time that I was so moved that I was crying. Like when I was reading, when she was dying and talking to Quinlan and stuff, it was, it really was a very moving scene. And I guess I was just in the right mood or whatever, that I was, tears were coming. I'm like crying, trying to pretend like, I wasn't like stupid dry air. Yeah, exactly. Allergies are acting up again, but it really was. And that just goes to show the strength of this relationship, because in a lot of ways you're mourning her death like Quinlan was. And I think it would be unfortunate if, in trying to bring her back, okay, they could explain that in ways that wouldn't necessarily negate Dark Disciple. They could say, okay, well, after you close the book, what actually happened was, they revived her, whatever, But it would be nice if they did acknowledge the whole Quinlan Voss thing, because again, it was so well done and such a beautiful story, and it was based on an unaired Clone Wars episode, unproduced as far as I know too, that Dark Disciple would almost warrant its own little mini series, like if they did like a 3-part animated movie or something. I think it would really be cool to do that. So I hope that, however, because I'm sure that this isn't one and done for Ventress. I think they're going to explain to some degree how she came back, because even though you could say, well, the audience at large, like the general audience, has no idea, like how many people actually read Dark Disciple. But look, Walker just talked about it.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, you can also say, well, how many people are going to watch two guys talking about Star Wars at 11 o'clock at night too? So,
Walker's just doing it. No.
well, that's it. That's my point. My point is that, the people that are doing it are probably people that, are pretty into
That
this thing.
are invested. Yeah.
Yeah, that are at least vested. But I think that one of the things that you have to look at, especially when you're looking at a lot of the novels and everything, is that they're more popular than what people think. A lot of them ended up on the bestseller list. And people forget that. They look at the people that read the novels as kind of that hardcore super fan. They're, kind of a fringe audience sort of thing. But the reality is, there's a lot more people reading these novels than I think what most folks realize. And so they can't necessarily just discount the whole Dark Disciple thing. Like, well, you know what? A lot of people probably didn't read it. Well, a lot of people actually did read it. And yeah, you could probably, the reality is that Star Wars has been dragged through the mud so much that I think you have a lot of people that just don't care like they used to. And that's not necessarily a good thing, but you could rely on that, I suppose. But I think the more responsible thing to do would be to somehow, if you're bringing Ventress back in the Bad Batch, then you need to explain her survival in the Bad Batch. Don't leave that to Dark Disciple 2 or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and so if I'm not mistaken, Dark Disciple was supposed to be season 7 of Clone Wars, right?
No, Dark Disciple actually was part of the unreleased season 6 episodes. So what happened was, and just, as a quick aside, Walker agrees. Yep, that's true.
He agrees.
the way that worked was, so you basically had Lucas was about to do another 22 episode run of the Clone Wars, but of course he sold everything to Disney, and Disney chose to just shut everything down. And so there were something like 6 or 7 finished episodes that had been completed before the the sale happened. And then there were a few more that were at various stages of development. So they basically cobbled together a 12-episode season and released that as season 6. And just said, okay, that's it for the Clone Wars. Filoni then came back later, like after Force Awakens or something, and basically said, no, I want to actually do this properly. I want to end this. And he wanted it to overlap with episode 3 and all that. So he then was given the green light to go ahead and do a final season of the Clone Wars. But Dark Disciple was part of the unfinished scripts that were supposed to comprise season 6. Which, of course, also makes sense because the end of season 5 is when Asajj had helped Ahsoka, and then Ahsoka, was basically went before the council, and they're like, oh, yeah, by the way, we made a mistake, so you can be reinstated. And she was just basically like, yeah, whatever. Wow, the lights just went out. I still got a few. But that's essentially what happened there. And so because it was this whole situation with an unfinished season 6, you had half of the season was basically released. The other half ended up just being these scripts, one of which was turned into Dark Disciple. The other one was turned into Jedi Lost. And that's how that ended up working.
Yeah. So, and it's weird because officially from Star Wars, they're saying that because of Asajj Ventress and whatnot, they said any of her appearances will align up with the book, which is interesting.
So, and actually, this goes into what Walker's saying. He's saying, oh, in case you missed it, Star Wars Lucasfilm confirmed in an article they published yesterday, we're going to get more series, and they will continue Asajj, of course, it's cut off. Let's see. Asajj's story in the near future. So, yeah, that And that's good, because I think that you can't bring back a fan favorite like this and just have her, basically just kind of half training Omega and then be like, all right, well, that's it for Asajj. It's like, well, wait a minute, you just brought back this pivotal character and that's all we're going to get? So yeah, I think that part actually fits, and I think that's good.
Yeah, because it says, we love Asajj Ventress. She's the character wanting to stories about Brad Rouse, supervising director and one of the executive producers of the series, tells StarWars.com. He makes clear that her return will honor prior tales, including the book in which the character apparently perished. We don't want to spoil anything, but we want fans to know that any new storytelling with Ventress would align with the events of Star Wars Dark Disciple.
Okay. Well, there you go. I mean,
so
they're going to factor in, they're going to factor into the book. Well, and I mean, if you think about it, if they're going to do that, because it isn't like that novel was published like a year or two ago. I mean, we've been living with that for a while,
for a while, yeah.
Exactly. So it's one of those things that, because that's been out there in the canon for a long time, it's like, okay, if you do something like this, then you have to explain it. And you have to take into consideration that novel. That would be a grave mistake on their part if they didn't do that. But I thought I was actually going to be a lot more skeptical. In fact, with her first episode back, I think I liked the fact that they didn't over-explain it too much. It's almost like, honestly, you know what it reminds me of? I'll tell you what it reminds me of. It actually reminds me of when they brought Boba Fett back. Because remember, they didn't explain how he got out of the Sarlacc pit until the Book of Boba Fett. When he was running around in the Huh?
Mm-hmm. No, go ahead.
Well, when he was running around the Mandalorian, it was just like, okay, he's back. You knew he got out of it. And I remember one of the things that you and I had said when they announced the Book of Boba Fett was, okay, if you give this guy his own series, you have to. If you don't show it, you have to at least, it's almost like one of those Family Guy things where he kind of looks off and goes, yeah, it was kind of like that time I got out of the Sarlacc pit, and I mean,
he kind of recants the story of what
happened. Recants the story, exactly. You at least have to put it out there. You have to, if not show it, at least give it some sort of narrative. And I think that they have to do the same thing here. It's like, you can't just bring her back. I mean, even with Darth Maul, they covered that eventually too. Like, they showed, what happened, how he got his spider legs and all that stuff. So, I mean, there was some explanation. I think they have to do the same thing with Asajj.
Same thing with Ahsoka, though. I mean, because the last we saw her, like, she didn't make it out of that temple when Vader, walked out at the end of Rebel.
Yep, the Ahsoka lives.
So it was like, okay, well, how? So it wasn't until we started seeing things about with the worlds and like how Ezra like yanked her out before Vader could kill her. And it's like, okay, well, that's how she survived. But
well, Walker basically says they pretty much canonized Boba getting out of the Sarlacc from his legend stories. Kind of. You have to remember that Lucas, the way the whole canon worked back then was that George Lucas was just very flighty about how he would do that, right? So in Lucas's mind, he would often say the only thing that was canon, and this is before the Disney sale, and this is, of course, Legends was the old expanded universe. Before the Disney sale, they would basically say, okay, I license these stories. Lucas would approve or disapprove, or disapprove of some of the stories. Like, he would keep a little bit of an eye on that. But whenever people would ask him about canon stuff, he would always say, the only thing that's canon is the stuff that comes from me. If you all want to consider the expanded universe canon, cool. But in my mind, it's not. But then what happened is he would selectively canonize certain things one of two ways. When he started making the prequels, he would do it by bringing them in, right? Like a good example of this, we've been talking about Quinlan Vos. Well, he brings in Quinlan Vos and has him mentioned in Revenge of the Sith.
Was it Ranger Disses or
Yeah,
Families?
because he was like Quinlan Voss is off on something when he was talking to Anakin, and they were talking about the thing. He was like, I just got the thing from Quinlan Voss. That might have actually been Attack of the Clones. It was one of those. But the point is, in the prequels, he brings Quinlan Voss in. However, what he also did in the prequels was he completely changed the backstory of Boba Fett. Everybody forgets that.
Yeah.
And so what Lucas would do is he would do that sometimes. The other way that he would canonize certain things, and it was more loose than actually putting them in one of his projects, is that people would ask and say, well, what about this? And he might go, yeah, okay, that's fine. We'll make that canon. But the caveat about that, though, is it would only be canon until Lucas decided it wasn't, because he might do something different. So yes, the whole thing, I think it was like Tales of the Bounty Hunter or it was one of those. It was like a collection story that was in Legends that depicted how Boba Fett got out of the Sarlacc, which didn't really differ a whole lot from what we ended up getting in the Book of Boba Fett. I mean, it differed a little bit because he still actually had his armor. He had, but his armor was being eaten away. It was actually, if you guys haven't read that, I mean, even though it's really no longer canon now, but it's still a really good read. Actually, there's a bunch of really cool short stories in there. But that was basically what they did, and then obviously they went in a slightly not terribly different, but it was a slightly different direction for what they eventually canonized in the Disney version.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one of the things about Star Wars changing hands, and you got different people handling the property outside of the creator. Is you're gonna start getting some stuff that could be muddled up sometimes. And one of the things that that Disney said that they wanted to do is they wanted to unify canon, and that's one of the things that they really kind of set out to do. So I think that that's something that going forward has somewhat hindered Star Wars in a way. And in some cases, I believe it may have helped. As we've gotten a lot of backstory, and we're seeing a lot of connective tissue in a lot of different stories. Like I said, with the Bad Batch series, that has connected a lot of different things between the events of episode 3 and 4. We're getting a lot of information now post Return of the Jedi with the Mandalorian. So we're doing some things, and there's some cool stories being told, but then there's also some storylines that are kind of like, well, is that really what happened? And is this is not what I remember, and you're kind of getting things kind of crossed up a bit. So I just hope that, that they stick to the word, which it seems like they will, and they would just actually give us an actual, definitive answer as far as like, okay, how is Asajj Ventress still around? And I was reading some things on Reddit, and one person made the claim, which I've been kind of hinting around as well, is like this whole thing has been around cloning, and they're on Tantus, so it could be a cloning situation where they've cloned Asajj or whatever, and done some things like that. So who knows?
Well, I mean, in the world that we live in, where everybody swore up and down that Snoke was Mace Windu, I mean, it's kind of like you're always going to get the theories. Everybody's going to have the theories, and a lot of them are going to be more plausible than others, because even when you and I were talking about theories before The Rise of Skywalker, theories before Last Jedi, even theories before The Force Awakens, one of the things that really any of these Star Wars theories have in common is the fact that some of them, of course, are just insane. It's like, okay, man, you just obviously are really out there. But there's other ones where you think about, like this whole Asajj could be a clone thing. You go, all right. I mean, it would be a shame. It in a way, it would actually be a way to make it to where she actually did die at the end of Dark Disciple, but yet we're able to bring her back. The only problem that I would have with that theory, though, is the fact that they always talk about how difficult it is to clone Force-sensitive beings. And Asajj is actually one of the more powerful Force users that we've seen in canon. So I doubt very seriously that they're that far along.
Yeah, that's a very valid point.
So I can't see
her
that.
end count's got to be high.
Well, yeah, exactly. And it's just kind of like, if they could have done that,
one go.
I mean, if you're going to clone somebody like Asajj, you're not going to clone, all these other people, right? I mean, it's
unless the fact that the Omega's the pure, like something about her M count is different than Asajj.
Well, because Asajj did point out, rightfully so, that when you're getting powerful, that's all training. I mean, there's people. It's the same thing with intelligence, right? I mean, you have people who might have a high IQ, but if they never really develop it, then they're not going to be that smart. But if you have somebody that's got like kind of a medium-sized IQ, but they really develop it, and apply themselves, they're going to be extremely smart. It's not just about the potential; it's also about what you actually do with that potential. And the same is true with being a Jedi. There is a little bit of that. So you're right. You have to factor that in too. And I'm sure that, because again, this is the last season, I'm sure that they have factored all this stuff in. Okay, so Walker's got another comment here. Let me just have to wait till it pops up. Here we go. Sometimes this thing is really slow. Oh, since Asajj actually said I have a few lives left, the clone theory could be put to rest. He goes on to say, Omega failed overall, but Asajj obviously sensed something when Omega finally took a deep breath and concentrated a little bit more during the balancing test on that slippery rock. Yeah, and I think that that's something that has to be factored in too, right? Is the fact that, sure, you can look at each of the tests and go, well, you technically failed, but it goes back to what you and I were saying earlier, that there was something in those that maybe was more of the test. Like, it wasn't so obvious, right? It wasn't about balancing an apple or whatever on a slippery rock. There was maybe feeling the power or the concentration or something like that, and that's what, not Omega, but Asajj actually felt. That was like, ooh, all right, she can't really do this, but this is even more telling.
All right.
I mean, one of the things that I thought was funny too was because, she knew that she had to deal with the clones, but you got to send the kid in the way so mommy and daddy can fight, right? So she sends them out to get that orchid thing. And what's funny was, she's like, okay, I'll go get it. And she runs and goes and gets it. And then when she comes back, it's all like force choking and, with a lightsaber drawn. I mean, if you can just imagine it from her perspective, that had to have been hilarious. Like, whoa, what are you guys doing?
What happened? Well, that should have been her first thing of like, okay, well, how are you doing this? The fact that you got this guy suspended in the air and choking him and you're not touching him. Number one. Two, it's kind of like, and what's funny is that it's almost as Asajj, either the test wasn't really a test of Jedi skills. She just needed her out of the way, because Omega's like, well, I failed the first one, but I passed the second one, so that's got to mean for something. Asajj really didn't even acknowledge the fact that she got it. She was just like, yeah, whatever. So that wasn't even really a test of Jedi skills. It's like, I just need you out of the way because I know what's about to happen.
Exactly.
So it's so the second test really was just the connecting with the whole fish thing.
Yeah.
So I thought that was hilarious as well.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the whole thing was. And again, I mean, it was a really good, solid balance of, you had some character development, you had some really good character interaction, you had some, action type that you would expect from a series like this. And then you also had a lot of humor that Star Wars, of course, is known for. Let's see. Of course, Walker says exactly then there's another message popping in. Boy, the message thing is slow today. He says, the best part of the Harbinger is seeing the Bad Batch actually think they can take Ventress down. Yeah, we brought that up earlier. That was the thing that was hilarious. Especially when Wrecker's like, well, we were just getting warmed up. It's like, no, you weren't.
No, you weren't. No, dude.
It's like, if you only knew who she's fought in the
Yeah.
past,
Exactly.
It's like, yeah, you guys are going to pose absolutely zero threat to her whatsoever. And I think that that's something that's important to point out, too, is that was part of the humor thing as well. But it also was showing the lengths, once again, that they would go to protect Omega. And it was also Asajj pointing out that, if you really want her to live up to her full potential, you're going to have to let her go eventually. And I think that that's going to be something that's going to be a theme that plays later in this season. Let's see. Walker's got another one. Says, I found it hilarious that Asajj immediately sussed out Crosshair as the weakest and took him down first. Poor guy. I wonder if they're going to go back to addressing his whole hand thing again.
Yeah, I know, right? I mean, I think he tried to, at one point he did try to shoot at Asajj, but of course he missed. But I don't know if he missed because of his hand or because she actually did something to deflect it. But yeah, I mean, we definitely got to get that resolved.
Got to get that resolved.
I definitely want to see, more with Asajj. I'm sure like he said, she's got to pop up more so we can kind of hear the rest of her story.
Mm-hmm.
This was episode 9, so we're coming almost down the barrel of the last.
We got 6 episodes. We got 6 episodes left.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's still enough, because if you think about it, like Obi-Wan was only 6 episodes as an entire season.
Well, what I'm just saying is because we got 2 coming up, so it's like this next.
Oh well, yeah,
it's gonna be 2
yeah,
episodes.
That's true, and I will remember that. Walker also said she also proved Wrecker's brute force wasn't enough, and that was one of the things that we talked about earlier in the show too. Was the fact that Wrecker fell pretty hard too, and it wasn't even like he was able to put up much of a fight. So yeah, that was crazy. Yeah, it is something that you wonder, because now they have all of these different things, and the last few episodes now we haven't really gotten back to the Hemlock story, at least to where we're seeing him and,
what he's got cooking up over
what he's got cooking up, even though the plan is also, it's been talked about, but we haven't focused on that part of it. We've just been seeing how it's affected them. And so I'm really wondering if they're going to get back to that anytime soon. I mean, it's like, okay, of course, we had to see Crosshair reunite with the rest of the batch and have them have their moment of mistrust. Because again, you don't want to rush through these things, right? So I'm glad that they took a few episodes to really flesh that out. But at some point, you have to do it. Walker basically says, since we all know Hunter is the best Clone Warrior, spending a little bit more time showcasing him and Asajj hand to hand was mesmerizing. So good. Yeah, it was. That was one of the things that I really thought was cool too, was the fact that when they did go to the action, again, it served the story. It wasn't just some mindless, hey, let's just put some, really pretty action scenes in here. It's one of those things that I think all the action in this whole season, honestly, has really told the story. And I think that that's just fantastic. Walker says, sorry, guys, I got into your chat about 10 minutes late and unaware you already brought up that awesome fight scene. Hey, no worries. This is like...
No worries, man.
This is kind of like one of those things where we discuss... You'd be surprised all the stuff. Like, I remember some shows we would do where... Because one of our regular reviewers, Ronaldo, he would often come in really late and bring up a bunch of stuff. But that's, everybody's coming into this at a different time. It's totally cool. Or, of course, my favorites were when we would be talking about a topic and then we would just get way off course, right? Like people would just be bringing in all these other things and we would talk about some of, still Star Wars, of course, but we would just talk about some other thing where, we're like, oh man, it's been like 10 minutes. We should probably get back to the actual topic of this video. But it's a discussion show. That's what this is all about. So, yeah, totally fine. But okay, I don't know, have we been rating every one of these or not? I could have sworn there's like some of them that we have, some of them we haven't.
Yeah, but if I had to rate this, I would probably give this one 8.5.
Yeah, I could do that. Because I know, which one did we give a 9? We gave one of them a 9. It was either the last one or the one before.
The one before.
Yeah, one of them we gave a 9. That was a really high bar. This was definitely, I could say it was an 8.5. It's funny because they didn't actually, as much as I liked it, I talked about the really good writing, I talked about all this other stuff, but it didn't have as much going on as I thought it would. Like, it was surprisingly light. Later. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this was the setup. I think this was more the once again, the world building. Mm-hmm. I think this is one of the story building of like, okay, for those of you who are not informed, this is who Asajj Ventress is. That's why you had the Bad Batch kind of look her up and kind of like give this whole dossier on her. Right. Like, oh, yeah. She was a separatist assassin. And what is she doing here helping? Why does she care? And, so I think that's all to set up, like, once again, the big thing. And it shows also that Asajj hates the Empire. She's like, okay. And it gives her reasons as to why she's invested in this particular situation. And she hates the Empire. She understands what M count really means and how that plays into all of them. And, she's kind of, look, you're asking these questions, you're going to get some answers that you may not be ready for. And because this is what it is, you're on people's radar very, very highly.
Well, and that's why I think, again, it plays into that Harbinger title, right? She's kind of warning people. Like, one of the things that actually gave me a slight chill was when she was like, look, you're not as safe here as you think. Because remember, we've been led to believe that, okay, this is like way in the, edge of the galaxy or something. It's a nice little peaceful paradise planet. Nobody even knows it exists practically. And we've begun to look at that as the absolute safe haven for these guys. And now to have somebody go, you're not as safe as you think, in a way, they're, that could be said of the audience too, that place is not as safe as we think.
Well, yeah, because, he's like, well, how did you find us? We didn't give Fennec Shand our coordinates.
Yeah, right, exactly.
How did you even know we were? Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like, so if I found you, and I don't even have half the resources the Empire does, that's why she's saying that, like, you're not as safe as you think you are, and you don't know how powerful the Empire is. That was the other thing too. She was like, listen, I know what the Empire can do. You guys, because you guys are, disbanded clones, you have no idea. But trust me, So, and she's had experiments, and I think she mentioned experiments done on her, or somebody was trying to do something to her. So I think that kind of, some things are kind of factoring in here. So we just have to stand by and watch.
Yeah. All right. So Walker basically says, by the way, please don't change your live stream schedule. There are too many other channels going on between Wednesday and Thursday. He says, my favorites are this, When I Found Your Channel, plus a few others who stream on the weekend. Well, we really appreciate that. It's good.
Thank you, man.
And
appreciate that.
We do. And not only do we appreciate it, but one thing that's really cool that I always love to see, I know you do too, is when not only when people find our channel, but they find our channel and immediately start chatting. Because the whole idea behind this show, although look, we don't have a problem when people just want to sit back and watch. Look, I do that. I mean, I watch YouTube 90% of the time. I don't think I ever chat actually. So I'm being hypocritical, but as somebody who's hosting, the whole idea behind this was to just give a place where sane, normal people can talk about Star Wars, and it's a non-toxic environment and all that stuff. And so, yeah, the more people that not only subscribe and watch us, but the more that they, that everybody chats, it just makes it that much better. And we've had a lot of lively chats where, there's so many people chatting, we could barely keep up with them. And, since we're talking about that, I would probably be remiss if I didn't say, if you do like this kind of content that we're doing, make sure you hit the like button. I know every YouTuber on the planet talks about that, but when you do hit the like button, just because it really does help the channel, and we really want to grow. We want to be in front of more people. In order to do that, we need you guys' support. Subscribe, like the channel, and participate in the chats. Speaking of which, got another one from Walker here. He says, remember in episode 4 when Crosshair mentioned the Empire keeps track of long-range comms? Yeah, that's a good point, and that's another thing, and I think that what's going to end up happening, and you see this, not just in Star Wars, but a lot of franchises, right? There'll be like a headquarters or a meeting place or something where the heroes can always go back and actually meet, and that's sort of like their safe haven. And then at some point during the movie or series or whatever it may be, that safe haven isn't invaded. And as an audience member, you feel violated because you've lived so long with these characters meeting in this place and it's been cool. I mean, one example, I don't know why it just popped into my head, but when they actually remade V the series, something similar happened, later on. And this happens in the original V and V the Final Battle too, where there's like some basement little thing that they can meet in, and they're safe. And nobody knows they're there. And they go off, they carry these missions, but then they can go back to this place and they're safe. Well, eventually, they were found. And it's when they actually invade that safe space, as a viewer, that just does something to you psychologically. I think that's why so many times writers use this.
Yeah, it's almost kind of like when, Vicky Vale walks into the Batcave.
Yeah, that's another good one. Yeah. It's a different kind of a thing, but it's the same type of deal. It's still an invasion.
It's like, okay, when Batman brings you there, it's because he wants you there. This time she pops in and Alfred is walking her up, and he even makes a mention of that in Batman Returns. He's like, oh yeah, like the time when I was like, oh hey Vic, how are you? It's just kind of like, the heck are you doing in here?
So Walker says, maybe they have red flag words on high alert, like if you hear anyone talking about M count, recorded ASAP. That could very well be. The Empire will easily be able to triangulate and pinpoint the Bad Batch and Pabu. I mean, that's another thing that I think that people like they're not used to the reach that the Empire has now. That's one of the things that does make them different from the Republic. It's like, okay, now all bets are off. I don't have to hide anymore. All this technology I got, I can just freely use it. I mean, where Palpatine's concerned, it's like, okay, all bets are off. We're now the Empire. There's no pretense. And so they can freely use this stuff without being choked by a Senate or rules or bureaucracy or anything.
Yeah, because the big thing is like, when you look at the prequels, which is where most of these guys are from, they were part of the Republic. And so the Republic was a certain governance of planets. And then you have the Separatists, who have another group of planets. And then you have the Outer Rim. Well, now the Empire is exactly what it is. It's taking over everything.
Right.
So now it's no longer like, oh, okay, well, we can't do this because this is Republic. Or we only can go this far because, a Republic credit. You hear that, oh, Republic credits aren't good here because it's not part of the Republic. It's part of the Outer Rim, or it's part of the Separatists or whatever. But now none of that matters because the Empire has acquired the entire galaxy. So now, and that's what Palpatine was saying at the beginning of this season. He was like, "You have the full resources of everything. Everything is at your disposal." So yeah, it's game on now.
Yeah. Walker goes on to say, or Palpatine felt Omega and Ventress concentrating in the Force and found them that way, kind of like how the Inquisitors sometimes found Order 66 survivors. That's another good point, too. I mean, ripples in the Force, you start using it too much. I mean, that's one of the reasons why Yoda stayed on Dagobah, in order to disguise that. He also wanted to empower his light side abilities more, so all the life and everything in Dagobah kind of amplified his powers, but it also masked his presence.
Camouflaged him as well.
Yeah. So, there's definitely that going on as well. But yeah, I think that this is really promising. Look, we're over halfway in the season, and pretty much every episode has delivered. I can't think of another Star Wars season of any of the shows that have done a similar thing at all. Even the previous Bad Batch episodes, I mean, as good as a Bad Batch is, they had some filler. They had, some episodes where you're like, all right, there's always next week, that kind of thing. This season, though, I mean, the story is great, the writing's great, pacing, directing, performances. I mean, it's just, they've really knocked it out of the park. It's like, okay, if you guys could just do this, and now take that to, say, season 2 of Ahsoka, or, I mean, Andor's pretty good too, but season 2 of Andor, or,
upcoming Acolyte.
The Acolyte, which, by the way, did you see that thing that I sent you today where there's probably not going to be a season 2? They've already are kind of backing off on that. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah. Definitely read that article that I sent you earlier. It's enlightening.
Okay.
All right. So, again, if you guys didn't see earlier, like I said, next week, got this really crazy job. So we might have to pre-record Monday's show. Friday's show, I think will be good. So I think for our review of episodes 10 and 11, because remember, they are going to release 2 next week, I think we'll be okay. So, you're definitely going to want to check that out. We don't know. We haven't discussed amongst ourselves what we're actually going to do Monday, or have we? I'd like to, if I can, give the audience an idea of what we're going to do. But if we haven't, you're just going to have to watch Monday and find out.
We haven't talked about it, but I have some thoughts.
All right. You want to share them now, or you want to wait?
I thought about, we pick our top 5. I would say either the funniest droids or the most personable droids. Droid with the most personality that we love.
That would be cool. I just don't know how much time I'm going to have to actually properly do our usual presentations on that. Should probably do something that's a little bit easier for, to produce. Gotcha. But as something that we do in the future, that's a good idea, though. Because that's something we, usually it's like top 5 bounty hunters or top 5, Jedi or something.
Mm-hmm.
Top 5 most personable, funny, however we want, favorite droids or something. That would actually be a cool topic to do. And there are a lot more droids in the Star Wars universe than people think.
Yeah, because I was sitting thinking about it one day. I was like, man, I could do a bunch of this by myself. I could almost do like a top 10 on my own.
Yeah, exactly. I'm saying.
Yeah.
I mean, some of them, it's funny. I remember we were doing a top 10 bounty hunter, and I'm like, man, do I know 10 bounty? I mean, it's like, you start going through everybody, and you're like, wow, there's not. I mean, unless you really go insane and go into legends and, everything else, we'll see. All right, let's give these last 2 chats here to Walker, and then we'll wrap it up for a Friday night, early Saturday morning, actually, depending on obviously, if you're watching us on the West Coast, that's not the case, but you're in the East, Midwest, it's Saturday morning now. All right, so Walker says, unlike the Republic, the Empire isn't shy to pay big credits to any informant like Sid when she gave up the batch. That's true. Goes on and says, hopefully it'll be another 2-for banger like episode 6 and 7. You know, it's funny. At this point, I am now at the point where now I'm expecting it. Because we're 9 episodes deep. And, I mean, we haven't really hit a bad episode. We haven't even really hit a filler episode. The closest we came on that was episode 2. Walker goes on to say, speaking of droids, just when I thought they're the pets in Star Wars, they give Omega a Lurka Hound. Yeah, I know. That's true.
Right.
You know, and I like the fact that they're mixing it up a little bit too, that they're starting to get actual animals. It's not always a droid, because it's so true. It is almost always a droid. But they did mix it up a little bit, and we appreciate that. All right, well, just watch us Monday, 8 o'clock. You know, there'll be something. We don't know what it's going to be yet, but, you know, we do know, though, there will be a show, and it will be on at 8 o'clock. And then, of course, back here next Friday at 11. So, with that, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.